let me welcome Dr. Deen G. Freelon to the Karen Hunter Show. Hello.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Well, I brought you on primarily also because you had these comic book characters at the top of your banner on your Twitter page. So I figured you must like comic books or cartoons or something. So that meant that you were going to come in with a little levity.
Well, some of them are comic book characters, some of them are cartoon characters. One of them is a character from the television show Westworld. So I basically, it's if it's black and it's tech, then I'm with it.
Okay, so you're Lovecraft country. Are you
Oh my
watching
gosh, yes.
WandaVision?
I do like WandaVision. I like Lovecraft Country. I really loved Watchmen when that came out. That was just
Okay, all right,
mind blowing.
all right. And do you play the guitar?
I do play guitar.
Okay.
I promised myself I would not advertise my SoundCloud right now, but so I'm not going to do that. It doesn't exist yet, but it will one day. Also, it's pseudonymous, so you got to find it.
Okay. Well, I'm putting big words out there that I got to look up during the break. But I'm going to do that.
It's not under my name. I'll put it under my name. It's under a pseudonym. You got to figure it out.
Okay.
Listen to my voice. You got to be like, that is Dean Freelon doing it, because
you'll deny it. All right.
That's how I do it. That's how I do it.
All right. So tell me how does a young man? Where are you from originally?
I'm from Durham, North Carolina.
Okay.
I was born in Houston. I was raised in Durham. That's where best known as the town where Duke is. So it's the next town over from where I live now. I teach at UNC. And so my mom and dad moved there in 1982. And so me and my siblings, my brother and sister and I, we grew up there. And I left for a little bit, did grad school in California. Did grad school in Washington State, actually. And then I did my undergrad in California. And then I came back, did some time in D.C., and I came back when the job at UNC opened. And, loving it. My whole family's still here, so, yeah.
What was it that attracted you to technology, to this digital aspect of media? What drew you there?
I mean, honestly, so my dad has always been like an early adopter of technology, okay? So, like, I'm talking like late 80s. You'd have so back in the day, you had computers that were they're called like 386s. You have a 386, and it was all text-based. So there was no mouse, right? No Windows, none of that. It was all, you typed it in, and you would, and so first thing I figured out how to do, right? So your listeners who are old enough will remember 5.25 inch floppies, right? These big black discs that you would put into a slot, you close the latch over. And so what my dad taught me how to do was how to access the directory, type it in, and then you get a game, right? So basically you had to figure out how to work that interface to get the game. So I figured out how to do it, how to read a file listing to figure out which ones were the games, and play those. And then, after that, like in high school, I got into doing web pages. This is 96, right? So this is before the internet is as big in the public consciousness as it is today. So I figured out how to do web pages. I got my first IT job at 17 working for the county, Durham County. I went to Stanford University. I ended up thought I was going to major in computer science. Ended up majoring in psychology. And primarily, the reason was because I didn't really like the way they taught computer science at Stanford. It's one of the best computer science schools in the world, but I didn't like it. And so I decided to wait until I left Stanford to teach myself how to program, right? So I got out of Stanford in 2003. I'm actually working at Duke University, and I was blessed because they basically gave me the space to teach myself how to do it. And I realized that the motivating factor for me was having a problem that I could apply it to, not just in the abstract learning how to program, but learning how to use program as like a means to an end, right? So once I figured out that was what it was, I was off to the races. I was collecting programming languages the way some people collect shoes, right? So I'm like learning this one, learning that one, figuring out how to do different things, stitch them together. And like now I do that as a big part of my job and my research. So that's like a condensed version, but yeah.
No, that's and I sense this. D Freelon, Freelon is where you can find him on the Twitters, or dfreelon.org. What was the problem that you were attempting to solve, or have you solved it?
Well, as an academic, I don't really solve a whole lot of problems. I like highlight them, and I try to get people to understand them as problems and try to get people to do things about them. I mean, originally, the first problems that I was trying to solve with programming were very trivial, right? So it was, it was my first job at Duke, I was a technology trainer. So that meant that I was teaching people how to do, this is like early 2000s. So this is like before Squarespace, before Wix, before all the super easy, things you can do to make web pages. So you're basically working with HTML, very, very old school tools. And so I'm teaching people how to use them. And so the problem that I had was the system that people were using to sign up for this was too complicated. So I said, I'll make it easier for them. So I designed a new system, make that easier for them, give them automated reminders. So like very boring stuff. But I thought, of course, like I'm a huge nerd, so I thought it was super interesting. So I'm like, all right, I can get this to have them do like a email reminder on the morning of. I can do this other thing that makes it like integrates into a database so they can log in and see which ones they're signed up for in advance, right? And add to it if they want to do that. So like, again, real boring, but I thought it was just the coolest thing ever. And so I got into grad school, and then I started getting into politics. I started getting politically. And in college, politics wasn't my thing. I got more into politics after I left. It was like just 2003, so it's the Iraq War really sort of was my entree into politics, opposition to it specifically. So I got into that, and that's what really got me thinking that I wanted to study politics, specifically media, from grad school type perspective. And so when I got there, I realized that a lot of the data that I was interested in was on the web. So, and then it was like, basically it was like putting two and two together, because the data was out there and you needed to know how to program to get it, right? So I'm not talking about, okay, copy paste tweets from off of Twitter, put them in Excel, do that. No, this is like far more complex than that. So this is downloading millions of tweets, millions of Facebook posts, finding out how to make sense of those using advanced techniques from information extraction to machine learning, right? All these buzzwords you hear about, doing it. So, and the great thing about this is I really want to tell all your listeners this, is the tools to do all this stuff are free, totally free. So all the programming languages I do and the software that all this stuff is based on, you can go out there and you can get it for yourself and start playing with it today, right? So it's really not, the barriers to entry are actually quite low insofar as the actual technology goes. The issue you run into is the learning curve is quite steep. So if you don't have the motivation to do it, it's not going to work. It's not going to happen. But what worked for me was finding a problem to apply those skills to and saying, all right, now I know I'm doing this. And then it was like a switch turned on in my brain, and I just was off to the races.
When you talk about politics, I was a journalist for a number of years, and I literally saw journalism take a turn that we could never come back from that led us to Trump. And I remember it like it was yesterday, and I'm going to put it at the feet of Arianna Huffington, because when the Huffington Post was, to me, this was the model for having a news outlet, and I'm putting air quotes, that didn't require anybody to be a real journalist, that didn't pay people for their journalism. Everyone got a byline, and the person that started it didn't care about journalistic ethics. It was just being first to market. And this so-called digital media space, it was just about clicks. And once you started commodifying that by allowing for people to get paid every time they got to click on a story, it was off to the races, which meant journalistic integrity, who cares? I got 1 million clicks on this. I'll print a correction and I'm making that money. And I said, this, we can never get back. We can't go back. What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Freelon?
Well, first of all, full disclosure, I got to say, my wife works for the Huffington Post. So, they are paying from the roof over my head. So I got to, you know what I'm saying? So my feelings toward them are somewhat mixed. But what I will say is, and my wife hastens to add this every single time people bring up what you just brought up, and that is that they don't do that anymore. so somebody, and so Arianna Huffington sold her stake, so she's out of it. And so somebody at the top, I don't know who it is, I can't tell you, had to change of heart. And so the people that work there now are, good journalists, and she wants folks to know that. And she got there after it and all the rest of it. So yeah, they got baggage, but apparently they changed. So that's, and I have to say that because I'm married to her and I want to, keep that going. So,
all right, I'm mad at you.
Generally, there is, the drive for clicks is very important. Everybody's trying to figure out the next, business model for journalism, right? I think now we're in a situation in which people are conditioned to receive information for free, right? People still understand that if you go into a store, you go into Walmart, go to Best Buy, whatever. Well, before the pandemic, when we used to do those things, you buy something that is physical in nature, and you're forking over hard cash for that. But I think people have a very different opinion or attitude toward it when the commodity is not a physical object. So if you're talking about news, you're talking about entertainment, you're talking about certain other things. Now, I think it's a little bit different when you talk about, music and movies and things like that, because in some ways, I think the streaming services recently have made things a little bit easier. That's a big change from a few years ago, back before streaming kind of got its footing. But I think when it comes to journalism, news, and that kind of information, public affairs type content, at least Americans really don't have that attitude of, this is something I should pay for. But it is something they should pay for, because good journalism costs money, right? It costs money to root out corruption and to get in there and to do all the important legwork it takes to reveal all those facts and information, and do so in a way that is, faithful to the truth, right? And so in some ways, I understand that, like, people need to want to find a way to pay for the very important work that they do, but you got to do that without compromising the quality of the work itself, right? And so I don't think anybody has figured that out completely yet. I work with a lot of people who focus more on that specifically in their research, and so I wish them all the best of luck. And my work does touch on that a bit. But I think that until somebody kind of figures out the next big model from the sort of 20th century model, which was, the monopoly newspaper, the three networks and everything, we're not going back. We can't go back to that, right? So until somebody figures out that next paradigm, I think we're going to continue to be in this state of flux, where everybody's trying a bunch of different things. Some of them are going to work out, some of them are going to work small scale. But I think we really do need a large scale solution to figure out exactly what you're talking about.
But bad journalism has been so profitable for so long at this point, right? Like, what do you think that pivot point will be in terms of that, right? Like, I think about Smartmatics versus Fox News, right? We're talking about now people actually penalizing bad journalism. And that is a bridge that is being built as people are crossing it, right? Like, so who knows what happens if Smartmatics get this $2.7 billion from Fox, whether or not that changes their the way they think about good journalism over at Fox, right? What do you think that pivot point is? Is it that we incentivize good journalism, or we penalize poor journalism?
I think you really got to hit both sides of the equation. I got to tell you, when I heard about that Smartmatic and Dominion stuff, I was cheering hard, man, because, people have been talking. I do a lot of my research on disinformation. We talk a lot about, all the stuff going on around, obviously all the stuff that happened in the wake of the election, right? Trump and his cronies, claiming it was all false and claiming he won when he clearly didn't, trying to disenfranchise black votes from coast to coast. And it's like, right in the middle of it, all of a sudden, it's like it kind of like it came out of the left field for me, right? Because even though I studied this, but even looking at it, I was kind of like, oh, it makes so much sense, right? How are you going to change this? Hit them in the pocketbook, right? You're speaking the language they understand. You know what I mean, right? So if you ramp up those consequences for saying things that are false, you use the basic, elements of defamation law, which are, right, you say something that is false, you say something that's damaging, and the person who said it, basically had, they should have known better, basically, right? You have like reckless disregard for the truth is what they call it, right? So even if you didn't necessarily know it was a lie, if you should have known better and they decide that in the court of law, then you are going to be liable for that, right? And so what happens, with these kind of lawsuits is even the prospect of a lawsuit itself can exercise what's called a chilling effect. So that means the next person who comes along thinking about trying to parrot some very obvious lies like this, they're going to think twice, because they don't want to take the risk of going there and then they're all of a sudden in a situation where they got to deal with a lawsuit, shell out all these legal fees and whatnot, and maybe they win and maybe they don't. So I think it's a fantastic development. I want to see more of these kinds of lawsuits that are specifically aimed at false content, demonstrably false content, right? Where you have broad agreement across the courts, you have broad agreement, with the journalists that are reporting on this. Only people who don't agree are the people who are invested in this falsehood, propagating that. So I think that absolutely. So that's one side of it. The other piece of it, as you said, incentivizing good journalism. I think that's absolutely another piece of that. What better incentive is there than money, right? Pay folks, right? People do good work. You pay them. I would encourage every listener to, subscribe to some news outlet and actually put it on your subscription, right? You pay for, Disney Plus, HBO Max, you know what I mean? Like Hulu, whatever, Amazon Prime. Put it on, put that on, a journalistic entity that you really trust, right? I mean, as we said, right, this costs money, right? It's not free. And by making this a valid choice, career choice for people, then you are subsidizing the spread of truth and valid facts at the expense of this disinformation that we are, as we said, trying to disincentivize. So I think that's the way you do. That's the way that every person that is listening to this right now can really help us to pick one, whether it be local or national. You like it, you trust it, put some money on it.
The lawsuits, I want to get back to that because I think that is a very viable, like you said, the chilling effect is real. You know, you look at the ACLU, they have a particular function, the Legal Defense Fund at the NAACP, they have a particular function. Is there a law entity, you know, the ADL, they have a particular function. Is there an entity that we can invest in or, you know, support with the sole edict to go after disinformation campaigns and different information outlets?
That's a good question. I'm not personally a lawyer. What I would do, so, I mean, obviously, you know, one of the nice things about the Smartmatic and Dominion cases is, as, you know, profit-bearing companies, they don't need our money. So, you know, you don't need to be giving them anything. I mean, LDF does great work, right? NAACP, Legal Defense Fund, and obviously the ACLU does really good work as well. I don't know whether there's specifically any legal organizations whose main or sole mandate is to go after disinformation. I wouldn't be surprised.
So I'm saying this to anybody listening right now as well. If you are in the legal space, you know, I had a very, very smart person that led our editorial board at the Daily News who understood that, you know, hyper focus on an issue or a problem to be solved can win you a Pulitzer. And, you know, this is the space, you know, Thurgood Marshall, hyper focus on a particular problem, you know, instead of being a general attorney who's looking at everything, find that problem, that pain point and solve it. Like you just did, Dr. Freelon, with technology, find the problem and solve it. And then you're going to build the support for it because we need this. We need an arm, you know, the way you look at Norma Ray and all, you know, who's it? The woman, oh my gosh, who's, anyway, I can't remember right now, but who went after the environmental companies and those lawsuits changed the way we are doing business right now. This is important. And the second thing on the journalist side, you know, because I'm in that space and I want to empower people to go into that business. And you're right, it doesn't pay. You know, there are other places that you can make more money in PR and having a YouTube channel. Like, this is more important and more valuable, but we don't put enough into it. And where can people get their news? I like that you're asking them to go and subscribe, but where are the news outlets where we know we can get the truth? Where are those places?
So this is something that I have done research on. So specifically looking at people of color, Black people. So the report that we did is we looked at Black Americans, we looked at self-described feminists, we looked at Asian Americans. And so one of the major findings from this report that came out in 2018 is funded by the Knight Foundation. Shout out to the Knight Foundation. And so one of the major findings of this report was that people tend to trust individual journalists more so than the outlets. And so you see this all the time. Like, the same people will be, dunking on the New York Times one day and like praising it the next. But then the thing you have to understand is that in their minds, I think it's totally valid, is that the New York Times is not one entity. It is a collection of journalists that some of which do really good work, some of which do work that is, quite frankly, not as good. Just going to say it. And so what I would recommend is to try to, I think specifically from a Black perspective, you want to go and find these outlets that are doing really good jobs of employing Black journalists, right? And so, at the Huffman School, we try to do our best, at attracting, Black students to the profession. We actually have more Black faculty than most journalism schools, so that's a big thing. And so you really want to look at the ones that are really going out of their way to do that. So the Washington Post has some very good ones, right? So I subscribe to that. New York Times honestly could be doing better, but they've got a few that have a really good couple of columnists that are good there. But that's something that I think that's a really good, as I say, exercise for the listener, right? So go there, look at the masthead. Those pictures are on there. You can see who was on there, who was representing, and also even if they're not Black, like the ones that are able to do journalism that speaks to the concerns of your community, and it does so in a way that respects, the principles of, anti-racism and not putting false equivalence between, somebody who stormed the Capitol and somebody who thinks that's really bad, right? So I think a lot of this has to do with the observed behavior of these journalistic entities over a period of time, first of all, and then secondly, the individuals that they employ you're a fan of a particular journalist or set of journalists, support those institutions, right? And that's individual, that takes a little work, but, I think in the long run, it's really worth it.
Good journalism is expensive. I think we've established that, right? But was there anything in any of your findings that speaks to the health of Black-owned media and Black-focused journalism specifically? Is there anything in the findings around that?
Yeah, so that's one thing that we definitely need to look more at. And so in that report that I was talking about, we were looking more at Black news consumers, right? So we were looking at sort of the way that they interact with all kinds of different news outlets, but primarily sort of mainstream, right, predominantly white outlets. And so I think an interesting extension of that work would be to look at exactly what you say. So consumption of Black-owned and primarily Black staffed news outlets by Black and possibly by non-Black audiences, right? So we assume that most of those audiences are Black. I think that's probably a good assumption, but it would be interesting to put a number on that, right? So what percentage of your audience is actually Black? What percentage is other races? And then how does that end up breaking down? I think I'm not aware of research to that effect. I think there might be some, but you actually got me interested. I'm actually, as soon as I get off of here, I'm going to look that up and try to see if there's any work on that. One of the issues that you do run into is that it does become very difficult unless you have access to some of the inner workings and the analytics that are going on beyond the hood for some of these organizations. It becomes very difficult to estimate those metrics from the outside, right? So in other words, if I were to partner up with like a Blavity or the Root or the Griot or whatever, and they were willing to give me that information, that'd be one thing. But it'd be very difficult for me to do that from the outside. What I could do is I could look at some of that from the perspective of people who are responding to their Twitter account, but that is only a small subset of the people that actually engage with the content and read it.
Right.
So I do think that will be really, really good to assess the health of that. And I'm really interested to see if folks have already done that kind of work now.
And to take it even, because I struggle with the clicks and algorithms even the so-called Black-owned outlets. Just because you have a lot of Black people, just because your whole staff is Black does not mean that you're serving up truth or serving up, factual good journalism.
Yeah.
How do we balance that? Because I see the clickbait headlines, and then I go into a story, and I'm like, really? All right, you got me. You got my number, but now I'm not coming back. But a lot of us do. We support some of these outlets just because, and they tend to be, some of them, very toxic and just the opposite of what we need in terms of information and empowerment. What do we do with that?
Yeah, I think you're right. Personally, in my own consumption of news, I do try to keep that, to a minimum. Obviously, I have an academic interest in it, but as far as what I consume on a daily basis, I try to keep that, relatively low. I try to, be a healthy consumer of news. Same way I do with food and everything else. But yeah, I think that's something that people need to pay attention to. So I think there are sites that do fact checking. Actually, it'd be interesting to see if there were any sites that do specifically Black focused fact checking, because there's definitely like a fact checking industrial complex that's out there. But I don't know whether any of them specifically cater to the Black community. I think it'd be interesting if they did.
That's interesting. That seems to be a hole there. Hello, y'all. Hello.
Yeah.
Question: besides the Washington Post, what other outlets have you discovered are fact based and culturally responsive?
Oh my goodness. I'm trying to think now. I really, the Root. I've been a fan of the Root for a very long time.
Danielle Belton is amazing.
I like the work.
Yeah.
I like the work that they do. It's one that I'm on their Twitter feed. I check the stuff out. Gosh, I'm trying to think. TV One has some good stuff. I honestly haven't checked in with them in a little bit, but that's something I feel like I should do. And then another one that's actually a little bit surprising to me is the Atlantic, honestly. So they're obviously a predominantly white outlet, but the Black thought that they publish is actually quite good. So they publish a lot of great stuff by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and some other folks as well. And so the sort of Black focused stuff that I've read there has been quite strong, and I really do get into that. And so those are some of the main ones. And then honestly, a lot of it comes through it's not necessarily the staff writers that are doing it. It's, people who just are sort of, the New York Times, every once in a while I have something. And so for me, I end up just getting a lot of this stuff through, this was like the most shared, or, I just heard that somebody I really trust and know had a piece that came out in, whatever high profile outlet. And so even if I'm not a subscriber, then I might, check out that specific story because it's by somebody that I really trust. And so a lot of times that ends up being how I end up consuming a lot of the news. And based on our research, that is a very common, way of doing that.
Listen, I want to continue to have this conversation. I wanted to meet you. First of all, I love following you on Twitter, and I just thought this is some interesting work as a journalist. There are levels to this. We're just scratching the surface. And where can people see your research?
Well, if you go to dfreelon.org, I recently, redesigned it. So if you go to where the CV and publications area, you can read them. Obviously, a lot of the peer-reviewed research is a little bit dense, but I do write a fair amount as well for more public audiences, and so all that stuff, most of that stuff is on there. I think the last couple of things I put on there are not quite on there. I got to update that, but most of the stuff is on there, so you can definitely check that out. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those about anything that I've written.
All right, we're going to stay in touch with you because I have some work to do, and I think you can help. Dee Freelon, thank you, Dr. Freelon, Deen Freelon. Appreciate you being here today.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me.